This is a summary of World War One. The assassination of the Austrian Archduke in the Balkans in June led to an international trouble throughout July, and the war was inevitable by August. The key nations was Germany and Austria-Hungary on the one side, and France, Russia, and Britain on the other. The most common way of getting soldiers to join the war was to rally the conscript forces, but Britain was rallying volunteers to join the expeditionary force. The new technology made the warfare different and more dangerous than before. The artillery and machine guns forced the soldiers to dig in, otherwise they would get shot down where they stood. Old warfare was different because soldiers could only fire one bullet at a time, and then they had to reload, which took time. Now the soldiers could just empty a magazine towards the enemy. A lot of people supported the British flag during the war, and when Christmas arrived in 1914, there was called for a truce during the Christmas, and friends and foes were celebrating Christmas together. In 1915 was a year of restoration. The hope of breaking through the trench dreadlock faded because minor frontal attacks resulted in small gains and many casualties. They began to use aircraft to fight the war, and they dropped bombs upon targets. The Germans started using poison gas, and that broke all chivalrous rules there had been earlier. In May, a famous transatlantic liner was sunk, and many died, which resulted in a strong anti-German feeling. 1915 was notable for a growing acceptance that the original bright hopes for a swift return for peace would not be easily realized.
1916. That was a year of killing. The Germans mounted a massive attack against the garrison city of Verdun, and the French fought back. The battle claimed hundreds of lives. On the Eastern Front, the Russian general launched a major attack, but was fought back by the Germans. The Germans and the Britons met each other for the last time at sea, where the Britons would gain victory. And 1917, that was a year of pessimism and confusion, though not without hints of better things to come. On the Western Front, the failure of an over-optimistic French, known as the Nivelle offensive, led to a widespread mutinies in the French army. There was a final push made by the Britons, this time in the Flanders. Because of the muddy terrain, both the Germans and the British led big losses. 1917 marked the year where the Americans would join the war on the Allied side. Baghdad fell in the hands of Allied forces, and even though the French lost the battle in April, the British and Canadians succeeded to seize the famous vantage point, Vimy Ridge. All across the battlefield, the Allied began to win and gain ground.
In 1918 was a year of disarray and almost unexpected victory. The convoy system was adopted, and that solved a lot of Britain's blockade problems. A massive German frontal attack on the Western Front made it clear that the idea that the trenches would not be overrun was a lie, and it seemed like the Allies would suddenly be defeated. The Allied forces had their back against the wall. The Germans got exhausted, and when Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, he left it to the politicians to sue for peace. With hindsight, it could be said that the war had an untidy ending, with no clear winners. Hitler would also later argue that the Germans never lost a military defeat, but the loss was because of savvy politicians. Both sides have massive casualties, both physically and psychologically, without winning anything. The technology changed the warfare forever, and even though the general population saw the war and the soldiers as a glorious thing, the reality was a lot more dirty and a lot more dangerous. The war was not easily won, as the Britons thought at first.
So I'm going to tell you guys a little about two poems, and the first one is Dulce et decorum est by Wilfred Own in 1920, which means that's after First World War. So Wilfred Own was a soldier in the First World War, and he met Sassoon on at a hospital. So and he was a big fan of him. So some of his writings were actually formed by some thoughts that Sassoon also had. But most of this dulce et decorum is very it's looking in a very negative way on the war. And as he says here in the first stanza, men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5 9s that got behind. So it's describing the horrors of the war that they were sent upon, and how many of the soldiers, the equipment they had were either broke or it has been lost somewhere in the mud, in the trenches. And then in the second stanza, he's talking about gas, where he says, "Gas, gas, quick boys, that ecstasy of fumbling." And then he describes how they get their gas masks, and then one of them, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, Sunday green sea, I saw him drowning. One of the soldiers from his own army drowned because the gas they used starts filling your lungs with water, so you drown from the inside. And that's a very nasty way of dying, and that's also what he says in the next stanza. And here he's talking about post-traumatic stress. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. So again, very living language. That's what he's known for also. And then in the end of this poem, in the last stanza, he's talking about the old lie, dulce et decorum est, hoc patria mori, which means it is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. So he thinks it's a stupid idea that it's a good thing to die for your country. He does not, he do understand the idea of war, but when he has just been in a war and he does not ever want anyone to go there and be affected as he was. That's actually what he wants to tell us with this poem. So the second poem is also by Wilfred Own, and it's called Disabled. Disabled is about this man who's sitting in a wheelchair, and he sat in a wheelchair waiting for dark and shivered in his ghastly suit of grey, legless, soon short at elbow. Through the park voices of boys rang, saddening like a hymn, voices of play and pleasure after day, till gathering sleep had mothered them from him. He's sitting thinking about his sad life, his sad situation after the war. He lost his legs in the trench wars in the First World War, and then in the second stanza, this was the first one I used to describe. In the second stanza, he's talking about now he will never feel again how slim Go's waists are, or how warm their supple hands, all of them touch him like some queer disease. So he's talking about how he was adored by girls before he went to war, and then afterwards, as I just said, all of them touch him like some queer disease. So they are actually more or less disgusted by him, even though he's a war hero, and most people actually adored war heroes back then. But he's a cripple, and he lost his legs, so the girls do not want him anymore. And also here there was in the third stanza again he's very he feel a lot of pain for his own life in his own life. And there was an artist silly for his face, for it was younger than his youth last year. Now he's old, his back will never brace. He's lost his colorful very far from here. Oh, he's lost his color very far from here. Poured it down shell holes till the veins ran dry. So here we again poured it down shell holes till the veins ran dry. So he poured his color, his life into the war, so that now he does not have anything left, anything else, and his lost legs and his crippled body. He's just a shadow of his former self. And in the end, he's thinking about in the fourth stanza. He's thinking about why he actually joined the um, the army, and he says someone has said he'd look good in kilts. That's why, and maybe too to please Meg. So he just, as every other young boy back then, they played war, or maybe cowboys versus Indians, um, and well, they loved guns, and all of these things tricked them into thinking that war was a good thing, and war was something they would love to do, and that's why he thinks, after he thought back to his idea of why he wanted to go to war, and that's why he thinks he went to the war, because he thought it was he would come back as a hero, but he didn't. He came back as a crippled man who's just a shadow of his former self.